Welcome to the Light Reading Podcast. I'm Kelsey Zeiser. I'm an editor here at Light Reading, and I am joined today by
Sterling Perrin. I'm an analyst with Heavy Reading, now part of Omdia.
Good to see you, Sterling. Thanks for joining me.
Sure, good to be on the podcast.
Yes,
Like saying.
welcome. So there's, of course, been a lot of conversation lately around how to make all of these different AI technologies and applications run. A lot of talk about having sufficient GPUs and data center data. Sorry, words are hard. Data center resources to support those AI workloads. But another, really big issue is how will all these AI applications impact network traffic? And I'm sure that's, very front of mind for service providers. So you recently published a report about that topic. And before we dive into, some of the highlights there, can you give just a brief background on who you interviewed for the survey and what their backgrounds are, titles, for example?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. And it is important because in the topic of AI, the end market is definitely critical. You'll get very different views depending on. So most of the focus, as you've kind of alluded to already, has been on the hyperscalers, Google and Meta and Amazon and et cetera, and how they're building out for AI training. Another important part, but less, I guess, profiled at this point, is the communication service providers, or basically the historical telecom network providers, which are in the connectivity business, but we're not really the initial group associated with all of the AI workloads and data and all that. So this survey, because of our heritage at Light Reading and Heavy Reading, is focusing on the telecom market. That is who we survey. And so we did a survey of that particular group of service providers to get their views on how they're seeing opportunities and challenges within AI. So carrying AI traffic themselves for across different applications. So we had 77 operators or 77 respondents respond from communication service providers, CSPs, globally. So it was globally. Our surveys tend to be about half North America represented and half all other countries. And we were able to do some data cuts too, based on how particularly US is thinking of things versus other regions at this time. So it was conducted in February. So still fairly, fairly new data. It was our first look at that particular segment for a survey. So we did get a lot of good, interesting results from it. And it was really a starting point for how we'll continue to see how that market evolves.
Mhm. Right. So, thanks. That's helpful, and we'll definitely dive into some of the region-specific
Mhm.
data in a bit. But wanted to start with what were your findings on the kind of traffic demand that AI will have on service provider networks over the next 3 years?
Yeah, we broke it down by metro and long haul, and we wanted to get a sense of how those two segments would grow over the next 3 year or so period. And we found, just generally, we found metro. Well, they're expecting strong growth, as you would expect, across everything. Long haul actually doing a little bit higher expectations on a global basis than metro. So if you look at just kind of trying to find a good data point, looking through share of traffic in metro and long haul, the groups growing, thinking it's going to grow to over 50%. About 18% of operators thought their metros would grow to that extreme amount. About 30% of operators thought their long haul would grow over 50% of traffic volume. And so it kind of filtered through as you go down the different increments of growth. But at the higher end, say, 30% volume or greater, it skewed a bit more towards long haul expectations versus metro. And we did have differences in the traffic expectations or traffic volume expectations by region. And then one other kind of data point we cross-referenced all of it to is my colleague Brian Washburn covers enterprise services on the Omdia side of the group, doing subscription reports, et cetera. And he's actually been looking at a very similar market segment, the CSP market, and growth in traffic around AI over the next, I think he puts maybe a 5 year, probably, yeah, he actually puts a 10 year period on it. And globally, what he's seeing is growth on network traffic from AI, enhanced AI traffic, he calls it, is going to have a 33% CAGR over that 10 year period versus conventional traffic growth at about 17%. So, they're expecting CSP traffic to grow significantly stronger around AI versus non-AI. And so the data that we're getting in terms of volumes are largely, I think, largely in line with that, seeing fairly significant volumes attributed to AI in the 30% of volume plus range over the period we were looking at, which was about a 3 year period. So, lots of growth expected. As you might expect, these are telecom operators responding to what they think will happen, and it also means what they hope will happen, and that kind of flows
Mm-hmm.
results too. This is what they kind of want to happen, because they benefit obviously when the traffic leaves the hyperscaler network and hits their own network.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. And uh, what are your thoughts, or what were some of the findings from the report in terms of why their expectations were for higher traffic demand related to the AI over the long haul versus metro networks?
Yeah, and there we had to guess a
Mm,
little bit because this is a survey with about 15 questions, and we ask the question, you move on to the next. So they're not in-depth interviews.
right.
But if you look at, I guess I should just qualify that as it's not that there wasn't growth expected in metro. They were fairly similar expectations, but long haul had an edge in volume. So it's in both places. But if you look at like a hyperscalers network for DCI, a lot of times a hyperscaler can and will build that network out themselves. So they have two data centers in a city, or maybe even two cities next to each other, and they build out their own metro DCI network to connect those. And it's fairly common to do that. As you move into connecting things over a long haul distances, it becomes tougher to do that. Obviously, it's more complex. There's cities, there's multiple states involved. It's a big construction project, et cetera. So what we find is when things do leave for DCI, when things do leave the metro, it has even historically been a role where the telecom operators, the CSPs, come into play to carry that traffic for hyperscalers and for lots of different other types of network operators as well. The metros, are more, they're a bit easier to build out on your own if you have the resources to do it, and even for fairly big, sophisticated types of providers, it long haul can be tricky. So yeah, so long haul would always get, I would think, an edge in terms of opportunity for a CSP, just for those reasons. And so the data is showing that to a degree, that they're needed a bit more in long haul versus metro.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, you mentioned that you spoke with, folks representing CSPs from different regions.
Yeah,
What did you find in terms of some of the geographic differences as to their expectations for AI's
yeah.
impact on traffic demand?
And there were lots of them. This is one of the surveys where almost everything was fairly significant difference between the North America group versus the rest of world group we surveyed. Just back to that traffic growth metric, which I think kind of filtered out throughout the entire survey project. If you're looking at the operators that expect traffic volumes to be over 30% attributed to AI over the next 3 years, almost 2/3 of the North American operators thought the volumes would hit 30% plus traffic volume from AI. So almost 2/3 versus for ROW, rest of the world operators we surveyed, it was just about a third of them thinking that. So almost two, not quite, but almost 2-to-1 difference in expectations for North America for that rapid AI contribution versus rest of the world. And that again showed out in lots of different things we looked at through the survey. Interestingly, even in terms of readiness for AI, which we asked in one of the questions as well. Interestingly, the rest of world respondents largely felt they were more ready for the demands of AI versus the North American respondents, which is somewhat counterintuitive because the North American ones are definitely more, as a whole, more entrenched and more advanced in just this emerging market, just because so many of the hyperscalers are based in the U.S. market. So it was interesting that the ones that have the more advanced perspective and deployment felt less ready than the ones that haven't quite started yet or are just kind of getting into it.
Mhm. Yeah, that is kind of interesting that they're, seems like they're selling themselves a little bit short there.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The North American operators just might be more aware of the problem than other countries
Mhm.
at this point, just because they're seeing the effects of it and they're starting to understand what's entailed in terms of builds and what types of capacities are needed to meet what you see it on the hyperscaler side all the time with the kinds of volume demands that they have within the data center and for GPUs and for training and for clusters and for connecting clusters. So it may be that the North American operators are just a bit more entrenched in that reality versus other regions. With another bit of a caveat that I should say, when we look at the rest of the world for this survey, it's not a huge sampling, so it's kind of like everybody. So North America is primarily U.S., so one country,
Mhm.
two countries with Canada. Rest of the world was everybody else, so it's a sampling of that. I think you could find, or you would find, if we were more targeted when we looked outside of North America for this survey. I think if we targeted specific countries, you might find in those specific countries that are advanced that the results more closely map to what we were seeing in North America. You could have a country. I don't know. I don't want to pick a country because then I'm going to try to pick a country that's not doing anything in AI, and then I'm going to get calls and emails saying we have this, we have this. So pick a country, an unadvanced country that has done nothing with AI responding to the survey versus countries like where they are very advanced and involved, like China, which is generally not represented in our surveys, by the way. China, Japan, India, and a region of Southeast Asia is quite strong. There's a huge population around Indonesia, and it kind of touches a lot of places. So those particular countries in those areas are probably feeling effects similar to U.S. right now, but in our little bit of a scattered rest of world survey, they weren't coming through that strongly. So I think when I look at these results and you kind of predict how things are going to play out over the next several years, my instinct would be to take a look at that North America group and say, these guys are on the cutting edge, and this is going to start affecting other countries over time as they get more involved in carrying AI traffic. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful to have that caveat, and
yeah,
understanding
there
of,
we
who
do
you were.
these.
Yeah.
We do a lot of. We didn't do it in this one, but another way we do surveys is we look at lead adopters, and sometimes you kind of ask as a qualifying question up front, what level are you at? And one thing we do commonly is take out, well, what does the lead adopter slice of that look like, and what are they planning? And you do tend to find a lot of differences, and then that has always been kind of a barometer for us to say, well, this is where we're going. We didn't exactly do it in this one, so it's more like, where are you regionally? Is I think it's going to fill a similar role. I could be wrong because it's all brand new, but it seems like the U.S. is probably more um, knowledgeable in what's to come versus many other countries right now.
Mhm. And you also, in this report, looked at different connectivity services for AI traffic. What were some of the key findings in terms of the dominant transport services that operators are looking to support AI?
Yeah, that's another very interesting area. In fact, we have an optical symposium coming up in September. I don't know when this podcast will air, but it'll be on a similar topic, and definitely talking to companies like Lumen and Telefonica and Verizon who will be on that session, and others. It's going to be important to understand what do they expect to deliver to end customers as CSPs. So we know the hyperscalers build out the networks themselves, and at least the leading edge ones building the big training data centers right now. And a lot of that is dark fiber. So they will secure dark fiber from a service provider, and really many times, not always, but many times just do their own thing with that dark fiber. And so the CSP doesn't participate in that other than a dark fiber sale. So the capacity really isn't touching their network. It becomes the hyperscalers network. But it is an avenue, and it is the biggest one right now for selling into, certainly to the bigger hyperscalers, is a dark fiber. But then on top of that, or kind of moving up, there's different services you can offer. You can offer wavelength services from 100 gig wavelength services, 400 gig, 800 gig going forward. You can offer IP routed capacity. You can also offer kind of a dedicated private network build, which is a bit different from dark fiber. It's a network that's built and managed by the service provider, but for one specific customer. And that's becoming important in certain regions where the hyperscalers can't actually, by regulation, can't build their own network. Or even, we're hearing it in US, just for time to market and different reasons, it may be useful to contract a service provider to build out and run a dedicated private network. So those are all the different options out there. Um, where it is, like I said, where it is now is very much around dark fiber. Where this audience thinks it's going to go going forward is a big shift to high bandwidth wavelength services. Um, so instead of dark, and so this is where you're looking at who you sampled and kind of their biases or their wishes in responding, and that can be as important or even more important sometimes than the actual data itself. So we know that they want to move to a wavelength services model. They want to sell to enterprises or even to other large hyperscalers or whoever, but they'll get more profits. It's a better use of their own resources if they can sell a wavelength on a fiber rather than hand over the whole fiber and say that goodbye for 20 years. So they want to move. They want to move to wavelength for sure. It's very clear in this survey. Whether they can do it and whether it happens to the extent that they're expecting, which in our survey, half of the audience surveyed said wavelength services will experience the most growth from AI over the next 3 years. And then the second one that came on the list was dark fiber, which was only 25% of them saying it'll be the number one area to experience growth. So, it's a very big bet, at least for the survey on wavelength services. I'm a bit skeptical that it'll happen to that degree, but We know markets are going to move from the training to inferencing. We know there's different types of entrants entering it, and we know that enterprises doing inferencing are going to have traffic demands from AI on their network, and so service providers, always historically have sold into enterprises, so they're going to want to sell wavelength services with some sort of an AI flavor to them, whether they're marketed as AI wavelength services or they've added some functionality or whatever, or it's just serving AI workloads. But yeah, very much wavelength is the hoped for future for this audience. Which again, it makes sense, but it may not happen exactly as
Mm.
they hope.
Okay, so it sounds like the hope is then that instead of providing the dark fiber, which they would have less control over, they could you know possibly generate more service revenue over wavelength services, because then they would have you know potentially more customers and also be able to offer it as a managed service. Is that right?
Yeah, when you give over a whole fiber for a dark fiber, your fiber is gone. It goes
Hmm.
to the exclusive use of whoever bought the dark fiber. Whereas if you sell the wavelength, you can sell whatever 40 wavelengths, 80 wavelengths on that single fiber, and they're higher margin services, and it's telco traffic.
Hmm.
They continue to own the fiber, and well, they own the equipment, and they can run a service over it that's higher margin. So they always want to move kind of up the stack in terms of what they offer. And the very bare bones on that whole list of things is a dark fiber, where you just hand over that piece of infrastructure. It's big business right now, no question. The Lumen's $8 billion deal that they've, or 9 billion, I think they're up to, with hyperscalers, that they announced earlier this year, is very, not exclusively, but I think largely around dark fiber, specific builds that they'll build out to connect data center A and B. But I believe it's largely just dark fiber that is sold in those cases. So that's going to be a part of it. But as new entrants come in and as the market gets more mature, there's opportunity for other types of services, wavelength services, and then these private fiber, these private builds, which has a weird acronym in the industry, MOFUNs, managed optical fiber networks. I don't know if you've
Mo
seen
funds,
it.
mo problems.
MOFUNs, yeah. It's another, well, it's a real market, and a bit of a hope. It gets them also in a better position than just dark fiber, because they continue to manage and run the whole network. So that can be, and it should become more popular over time, even with fairly sophisticated operators, because the hyperscalers just want to do their hyperscaler thing. They generally don't like to be in the networking business, but over and over again, they find themselves in the networking business
Right.
for
Yeah, and
different
speaking of
reasons.
Lumen, they recently had a 400 gig announcement across 16 major metros,
Yep.
working on DCI. So yeah, definitely a
Yep.
lot
Yeah.
going
So
on.
that, yeah, wavelengths going from 100 to 400 gig, and even 800 gig. When you see, and when we do our surveys and we see interest in 400 gig and 800 gig, it is almost always something around, at this point, AI. It's generally DCI, and now it's DCI for AI workloads. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's a huge driver of that level of capacity
Right.
is going to be AI.
Yeah. And so just to wrap up, any thoughts on how ready CSPs feel like they are for this AI influx?
Well, yeah, that goes back to the my earlier comments that, um, generally this group of operators felt they are fairly ready.
Hmm.
Trying to find the actual data point.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah,
was
so in the
16% said they felt like their
as
optical
a
networks
full
were.
group, 16% saying they're fully ready. So
Hmm.
I mean, that's, I guess, realistic. But another 39% though. So if you add those together, 39% said they're basically mostly there, and then that 16% saying that they are there. So over half of them feeling pretty comfortable, which honestly was a little bit of a surprise to me,
Hmm.
given all the concerns about meeting these demands that you just see daily. But this is one of those areas where we looked at the North American respondents versus the rest of the world, and the North American ones felt much less ready than rest of the world. So I guess, if you're in a country which really not going to be impacted by AI, I guess you could say, yeah, I'm ready. But in a country like the
It's fine.
United States, where
Yeah.
they're really in the trenches with it, they felt significantly less there, and I think that's probably more realistic view. I've seen other surveys where there's like complete, they're sort of all over the place. Some surveys you can find people that say we have no idea, we're doomed, but I don't think they're doomed. I don't think that the sky is going to fall. I do think service providers have quite a bit of work to do to keep on this trend. It's obviously it's the big trend that's going to drive optical networks over the next 5 years for sure,
Mhm.
and the service providers need to track it closely and be a little bit out ahead of it, without being so far out ahead that you overbuild and we're back to 2000 bubble where you've built a bunch of infrastructure with no users. So they're going to do that little bit of a balancing act, and you want to be out a little ahead, you get the business, but not overbuild the entire world over and over again.
Right. It does seem,
Yeah,
are there, uh, with advancements in pluggables, does that help service providers in avoiding that overbuild because they can, kind of swap out some of that technology a little bit more easily in their optical networks or,
it's
um,
definitely a big. It's definitely well in the mix of advances that are going to help for sure. The coherent pluggables have just absolutely revolutionized optical networks, and they're as the technology gets better and better, moving to 400 into 800 gig, but also being able to transport those bits over very long distance, including long haul networks at very low power and with volumes much lower cost per bit. That is a key piece that's going to help help out build out networks that are sustainable. The hyperscalers are driving a lot of that within the data center, which is kind of a separate thing as we talked about before. But even for DCI, they're driving a lot of innovation for the networks that they'll build themselves. But those same components and pluggables will be able to be used by CSPs to build out networks for those managed services, for private builds, for wavelength, for whatever they need to do. So yeah, coherent is it's I get the right technology at the right time. It's existed already and had needs, and now the benefits are shifting a bit. I think from why they're needed most. Capacity is always going to be there, but the small form factor and the low power and the multi vendor aspects and pluggability and all that are becoming really really important for dealing with AI traffic, whether you're hyperscaler or CSP. Not the other, but another big one is going to be just automation and the use of AI, which is part of the symposium that I mentioned it as well. Automating as much as you can in the networks is going to help save not just manpower, but you can save energy. You can save capex costs by building these networks far more efficiently. You can do on-demand services to support companies that are doing like the neo clouds that are going to do GPU as a service are going to need very automated networks. So optics as the main currency of these AI workloads needs to move much more into automation. So we're seeing that as a big area of innovation going forward as well. So automation is kind of plugged along within telecom, and this will, I think, put the accelerator on it a bit for companies that want to lead in carrying this type of traffic and services.
yeah. Yeah, definitely an exciting time for the optical networking for your field, and
Yeah,
uh,
got
it'll
sleepy
be
for a
interesting
while.
too. Yeah, to see if exactly. Yeah, it's yeah. As you mentioned, just with coherent pluggables, it's been really interesting.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd be curious to see if you all do a follow up survey similar to this one, and say 6 months or a year, what
Yeah.
kind of results we'll see. But Sterling, thanks so much for your time. And we will link to this report and also to the symposiums if folks want
Oh,
to
great.
hear more from you and also from some operators about their thoughts here. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Great talking to you today, Kelsey.